whatever reason, it's at some point, at some point it must have been wider. It must have been either more events coming through here, or maybe the climate was a little different.
From ice age, that's why we get all the rocks in that valley.
Well, I wasn't around then, so it's only speculation, right? Some of that stuff. I mean, we kind of think we know what really went on, but a lot of times I don't want to go out there and say, oh, I think this and that, because we say a lot of things, and we find we really don't know anything. So, but I just have to look at the evidence, and to me, so without answering your question, right? I kind of leave that to you guys. But without answering your question, to me, I can see what the Mojave does now, right? Silverwood Lake's been dammed, right? When they let the water out, that's probably more, realistic as to what it's probably been historically. But at some point in time, it either shifted its position, or there was more water coming through and it was running higher. But at one point, it came up through here. It had to have. Not all the time, but it had to have come up this high. And the evidence we see is right here in the pit below us. So that's what I'm saying. Again, I'm not sure what caused it. I'm not sure exactly, whether we had ice ages or whether we had this, that, or the other thing. I mean, I always have my theories. But there's evidence right here that we had a river at this point. And the main evidence you see is that lovely sand down there at the bottom. But above that, you also see what we call stratified layers. Stratified layers are just soils, and as you guys who were digging probably noticed that. Well, the sand is a big obvious one. But even above that, we had layers that seemed to kind of go back and forth, right? The colors changed for one thing, but maybe even the texture changed. You guys know what I mean when I say texture? Mm-hmm. What's texture?
Fill, basically.
It's what?
Fill. I would call it
the composition.
It's the it's the feel, definitely the feel. But what is the feel made up of? You said the composition. So composition means what?
What it's made out of,
Dead
right?
plant material.
And what's it made out of?
Well,
minerals.
Organic matter. Different minerals. Right?
Okay.
Some of it's more usually like clay mostly. Right?
Okay, clay would be one of them.
Sandy, right?
Sand would be another one.
Silt.
Sand, silt, and clay. That's what soil texture is made up of. And of course, you've got some organic matter in there, depending on how much organics you have. And you also have other things, sticks and stones and rocks and all that kind of stuff. That's not part of texture. Usually we take it out. Anything that's more than 2 millimeters in size gets removed when we try to determine texture. So there's nothing really in here that's larger than that. So texture really is the feel of it. It's the composition of it. It's the minerals that are in a sense, but the minerals are pretty much sand, silt, and clay. Now, what they've come from, sand could come from any number of sources, right? Sand is pretty much what? It's just rocks broken down into smaller rocks until they got to even smaller rocks, and then we call them sand. That's really all that is. Because you can take an individual sand grain, put it under a microscope, and you can identify the rock it came from. It's just a little rock. You guys all believe that?
Yeah.
Okay, because that is essentially true. But silt it kind of goes back and forth because silt's a smaller particle than sand. But sometimes you can identify it, but usually it's undergone some sort of a transformation, a little bit maybe of a transformation. It's combined with something else. But a lot of times it's just a smaller piece of sand. It's made with or without some sort of a modification that's gone on. But clay's a big one that's really different because clay doesn't really exist in nature. Like doesn't come out of the rocks as clay. Okay, so clay actually is undergone, it's what we call a secondary mineral because it's undergone transformation. To get to be clay, it's actually gone through a process, a chemical transformation. Weathering had to take place to get to the sands. Further weathering takes place, and that's chemical weathering. It could be physical weathering. Combination of it really is what goes on through there. And then you get recombinations of these minerals. They're very, very small now. They combine with other minerals and with organic matter, and they become clay. And clay is the thing that in soils is the most. It's the thing that's the most interesting and it's the most important because it's chemically active. Sand is nothing but a rock. A rock doesn't really do anything chemically. It's just sort of a rock, right? Clay, on the other hand, does everything. Everything. It's so much of the properties of soil. When we talk about, say, fertility, or when we talk about a soil's ability to be compacted, or whether a soil could be compacted or not, or I'm trying to think of anything else we want to do. Whether you want to use it for a road source, or how it's going to be as a filter for sewage, or whether you want it in your garden, or whether it will grow this kind of plant or not. All those things are more determined by the kind of clay and the type of clay, how much clay you actually have in your soil than anything else. So I mean, clay has overwhelming importance in soil. And as far as but it is only one of the components of texture. So sand, silt, and clay are the three components of texture, right? With clay being the most see, I go around in circles with my thought. With being the most important for most of our purposes. So how did I get onto that subject? Because where was I going before that? I've already forgotten.
Composition and texture.
Right. We were going so well, and then
Why it looks the way it does here.
I lost my train of thought.
You were describing the different three: soil,
Yes.
sand, and clay.
Right.
Sand,
So what we are. Thank you for that. I'm going back now. So what we are on here is what would be called, as far as the landform, would be called an upper terrace. So at one point this was the floodplain. As the Mojave continued through time and etc. and water came through, it began to cut. Right. It began to cut its bank here. It dropped a little bit lower. At some point, either the climate changed enough, or it cut down deep enough that this terrace was probably more abandoned. In other words, we might have had a huge flood event that might have covered this terrace, maybe say once every 500 years. I'm just throwing that out there. I have no idea. Okay, but where it might have been in previous time, it might have been every 10 years or every year. You might have had water on this. Now it's going to be less and less frequent. If we continue further down, again, it's been so modified, it's hard to tell. But it seems like I remember that somewhere about where this playing field is, before they level it out, there was another terrace. You could actually see it sort of drop down before. And I think there was one more before you hit the actual